Good evening, everyone. I call to order the June meeting of the San Francisco Elections Commission. Today is Wednesday, June 21st, 2017, and the time is now 6:01 p.m. I'm President Jordanek. Secretary Chian, can you take the roll?
Commissioner Donaldson, not present. President Jordanek.
Here.
Commissioner Jung.
Here.
Commissioner Mogi.
Here.
Commissioner Roll.
Here.
Vice President Parrish, not present. Commissioner Safan.
Here.
And
Yeah.
Commissioner Donaldson notified me that he was running late today.
You have a quorum.
Okay, thank you. And we also have with us today Director of Elections John Arntz, Deputy City Attorney Joshua White, and of course Secretary Don Chian. Next agenda item.
Item 2, general public comment. Public comment on any issue within the Election Commission's general jurisdiction that is not covered by another item on this agenda.
Okay, members of the public, I'd like to remind you that this agenda item is not for open source voting. That's the next item. And if you'd like to sign in to have your name reflected in the minutes, you're welcome to do so on the table.
Good evening. This is a general comment, I believe. So this week there was an article about Republican data mining firm that exposed personal information for virtually every American voter. This is from The Intercept. None of this information should be terribly surprising, that there's all this information, especially about voters, floating around. And I wanted to bring up an instance of voter information sharing that did catch me by surprise when I was doing some volunteering for a local candidate. One of their head volunteers told me about the system that they were using called SF-VAN, which I assume is a subsidiary of NGP-VAN. It's like the Democratic Party voter database. And that during the training, he was telling me that because we were calling vote by mail voters, that once the voter had, we called them and they hadn't voted, once they had voted, that this was somehow reflected in the system, which I was a little surprised that they would have this information. So I don't know if SF Elections is, the party who is sharing this information, or if somehow SF-VAN gets this information through some other means. So I hope it is obvious that this level of information sharing, whether a voter has voted or not in an ongoing election, creates all manner of opportunities for manipulation. So I guess this could be a question, or it's just a general comment. So I don't know.
Thank you.
Hello, Brent Turner with California Association of Voting Officials. Just wanted to make general comment that there has been quite a bit of surprising news recently, nationally, that I'm sure some of the commissioners, I hope, have witnessed themselves. I think the country is in shock right now regarding some issues that this commission understands, but I don't think the rest of the country has been overly aware. The previous speaker spoke of that particular circumstance. We also saw Humboldt County be investigated because the NSA leak related to their county operations, in that Hart InterCivic was utilizing the system that was the point of the leak. and that was disconcerting. Also, I don't know if anybody witnessed the Senate intelligence hearings today, but that was very interesting, with the National Association of Secretaries of States blaming the Department of Homeland Security for failing to inform them regarding the Russian interference issue, and then compounding that, the Department of Homeland Security representative didn't seem too astute at these issues. As a matter of fact, Kamala Harris, Senator Harris, asked her if she'd ever read the California Secretary of State Deborah Bowen top-to-bottom review, and she said no, which was disconcerting. So we've had some conversations with the DHS recently, yesterday, as well as the Senate Intelligence Committee members, and we predicted that Alex Halderman, the witness from University of Michigan, the professor, would not be mentioning source code issues. As a matter of fact, during this hearing, there was no mention of source code issues. It all related, Professor Halderman merely spoke about paper ballots and paper trails and sort of convoluted those two issues. So in other words, this commission is far, far ahead in the leadership position for the United States regarding defending our voting systems against interference. And I just wanted to congratulate you for your forward thinking, because now, whereas when we started this journey, it seemed futuristic, but now, of course, you're right in proper position for leading the country towards secure election systems. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Okay, seeing no further members of the public, next item.
Item 3, open source voting. Discussion and possible action regarding the City and County of San Francisco's open source voting system project. A Commissioner's report.
Okay, I'll provide an update on a couple things. For starters, on the Technical Advisory Committee, provide an update on that. Well, for starters, Commissioner Rowe, can you give an update on the member that we had conditionally appointed, Carl? You had contacted him?
Just the fact that he provided his description of his services, and I determined that it was consistent with what we had discussed at the last meeting, waived that issue, and he's, I believe, been appointed to the committee.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so after Carl was confirmed as a member, we started reaching out to the members for scheduling information, and we got our last response last Friday. And Secretary Chan started looking into room availability, and I'm hoping to pin down the date for the first meeting within the next week, hopefully meeting sometime in July for the first meeting. And then the other update is around AB 668, which we had voted on to request certain amendments, and this is the Voting Modernization Bond Act. And I've been working with a woman named Katie Anjadi in the mayor's office. She is the director of state and federal legislative affairs. So I started out by drafting and updating a letter stating our position, and then she arranged a phone call with the bill author, and this was 2 weeks ago, and so this was one of the lobbyists. It was Katie and myself and a staffer for the Secretary of State and also for the bill author. And we talked for about a half hour and going over the 4 amendments that we requested. And on the call, I would say that they kind of agreed to maybe 1.5 of the 4 amendments, and they were just sort of the minor technical amendments, unfortunately. And so they kind of talked a little bit about their position. They were saying things like they didn't want to favor open source or take sides or create what they were calling winners and losers. And on the issue of saving money, I had asked them, what is the state's plan for 10 years from now when this $450 million were now? And they said that was a discussion for another time. So it didn't seem like they were really interested in planning ahead. So, towards the end of the call, I feel like was starting to make a little bit of progress on convincing them, and they were kind of asking some good questions, but my sense is that it's going to take more people contacting them to incorporate our amendments. And so after that call, I've been updating the letter, and then I also wanted to report that San Francisco Assemblymember David Chu he signed on as a co-author to the bill. So that's all I have to report. Anyone else? Okay. Director Arntz, would you like to report?
Yeah. I don't recall if the RFP to identify a contractor, right, the business case occurred before last commission meeting or not, so I'll just kind of go back to that point. So in May, we finished the RFP to identify a contractor to study the feasibility, the feasibility of the city's options to develop an open source voting system. And that was posted by the Office of Contract Administration on its bid website. And then last week, all the processes were completed, and I got all the necessary approvals. But then last week, I got a note from the Contract Monitoring Division to remove the RFP from OCA's website because the waiver that I had received, or the RFP received, in relation to the waiver for subcontracting goals came after the RFP was posted, and that waiver must occur prior to the RFP being posted. So I asked OCA to pull the RFP, and then the Contract Monitoring Division reviewed the RFP, I think, for about a week, and then today they signed the waiver again, authorizing it to be reposted. So the RFP is reposted on OCA's website. There are no changes. The subcontracting goals for local business enterprises have been waived. They have been approved by Contract Monitoring Division. Commissioner Jordanek noted on our website that the link had changed to from our website to the RFP had changed, so we updated that link, and then we'll tweet out the new link tomorrow morning from our Twitter account. I did receive one email from a potential proposer regarding the pulling of the RFP from the OCA's website. So I've been in contact with that person, and I noted that the RFP's back up again. So that's where things stand as far as the RFP and the contractor is concerned. So.
Okay, thank you. Actually, I just want to mention Commissioner Paris arrived during agenda item number 2 at 6:03 p.m.
I did have just one question about the language requirements. Under Section 1, it says, obviously, the software needs to use multiple languages, English, Chinese, Spanish, and Filipino. But in this jurisdiction, aren't we also required to do Korean and Vietnamese? Or are these 4 languages hitting a higher threshold that I'm not aware of?
No, the required languages under the Voting Rights Act and/or the local language ordinance are the Chinese, Spanish, and Filipino. And then we provide facsimile ballots in Korean, Japanese, and Vietnamese.
But that's not legally required, it's just us being nice?
No, well, it's required, so the Secretary of State's obligated during statewide elections to study precincts where there's the number of people who may need language assistance is less than 3%, which is a threshold at the statewide level for providing language assistance. But greater than, I don't know, a certain number, I forget what it is. So if it's less than 3, but above the lower number, then county is required to provide facsimile ballots. So we create ballots in those languages, but we don't provide full language assistance in those languages.
Director Arntz, did the schedule change, the date for questions and for responding to the RFP?
Yeah, I haven't, I thought about that. I mean, I could extend it. I haven't made a decision yet because it was a week, and I didn't get a lot of buzz back from anyone on it being pulled. So right now the answer is no. Right now the answer is no. There's been no change, no extension of the submission deadline. Potentially, I could extend it out another week.
I have just 2 questions. For starters, at the top of what's numbered as page 2, it's the second paragraph. It says that any contractor who is selected for this business case would not be eligible to be involved in later stages of the project. And one of my concerns with that is that I think that, from what I know, a lot of the organizations that have the most expertise are also the ones that would be most likely to want to participate in later stages. So I was wondering, was this an optional consideration, or was this something that is required by the city, this clause?
From my understanding, this is a requirement. This is not something that's optional. So if someone cannot develop the business case or be associated with the development of the business case, then later put in a bid for work for the system. That's, yeah.
Okay. And then the other question was about, I think you had told me privately, but it's not listed in your report. Did you extend you extended the job posting for the 1823?
Oh, yeah. So, yes. I can't remember if I mentioned this. Oh, I can't remember. So the 1823, we went through the first round. I think it was like 9 people we interviewed. I extended it out again for another 2 weeks. I redrafted the job description to be more in line with the immediate duties and really the longer-term duties of that person, which would be more around drafting, issuing, monitoring RFP processes, then potentially implementing the replacement system in 2019, and then working also on any efforts to develop an open source system. So the last 2 days, I've gone through another couple rounds of interviews to fill that position.
Are you confident that you think this round would be enough, or you're not sure yet?
Yeah, I just finished today, so I don't know if I'm ready to make public comment yet on the process.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So any other further comments before public comment? Okay, let's open it up to public comment on this item.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of the Commission, Director, and staff. My name is Alec Bash. I am pleased to see that the RFP has been drafted, and especially pleased to hear that it's back on track again, and pleased that things seem to be moving forward with the hiring of the staff. As I thought back in January, it would take some time until there would actually be a staff person on board. I'm not particularly pleased with my having thought that at that time, although it is what has come to pass. I know things take a long time within the city to actually hire people, but I hope that things will proceed apace at this point, where every month that goes by, we're getting closer and closer to not having a new open source election system in place for when we'll want to have it. I would have liked to have it by next election. I don't think that's going to happen, but thank you for all you are doing to help move things along, and if there's anything you can think of that might help things go more quickly, I would urge your consideration thereof. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Bash.
Hello again, Commissioners. Brent Turner with CAVO. Just wanted to make a statement, first of all, regarding AB 668. Some of the pioneers of the open source voting movement also spoke with the authors of the bill. I've had conversation with David Chu quite extensively regarding open source election systems, so I'm hoping he can be helpful to our mission to move forward quickly with appropriate funding of systems and such. But we also did reach out to Fletcher Gonzalez, Assembly Member, I think is her title, Assembly Member Fletcher Gonzalez, and we call the father of the open source voting movement, Alan Deckert, who originally demonstrated open source systems in 2004 and has been working diligently since 2004 on the issue of general public license open source paper ballot printing systems and tabulation. Has had conversation, and we're hopeful to have conversation with the city, county, as well as Mr. Deckert and President Jordanek, so that we can all get in alignment on best suggestions for revisions of the bill. I think he made some headway with them in that our position is, unless it's done correctly, we want to kill the bill. And I think that may be advantageous as a position moving forward, because, and I'm sure the county won't have the luxury of being quite so direct. So maybe forming some sort of a coalition would be prudent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner. And Commissioner Donaldson arrived at 6:20 p.m. just a moment ago.
Hi, Mirka Morales. This is a question. So, with open source, the machines that I've seen sort of prototype, the IDO machine in LA County, for example, this is all for polling centers, but what does open source mean for the count of vote by mail? I mean, isn't that going to be the bulk of what is going to be counted? So open source is also including vote by mail count, right?
Yeah, well, that's a question that LA would need to answer.
Oh, excuse me?
You're asking whether LA's vote by
No,
mail
no,
system-
I'm asking with the San Francisco open source project, it is,
Yes.
vote by mail is included. Okay. This is just the only machines that I've seen that I've been able to research. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Morales. Okay, no further members of the public. Director Ernst actually had another question. I know that the board had previously passed an ordinance requesting a report on the project during each year's, budget process. And is that still to come, or?
Yeah. So and I reread the language in the budget analyst report. And it wasn't how I heard it when I was at the committee. So I mentioned it in my budget presentation last Thursday, but I didn't go full bore into it. So I'll probably draft something later in the year, before the end of the year, to the board and the mayor's office and the commission. Something that's a little more substantive. Plus, we'll have gone further down the road,
Yeah.
I think, too. So.
Okay, thanks. Okay, any further discussion before moving on?
Yes, sorry, fellow commissioners and public that I'm late, but I do have one question that may have already been addressed. But in the, I assume we're on item 3 still, just on the Director Arnson, perhaps we're going to cover this later, but in the RFP itself, there was a paragraph in there which I specifically asked you about and ended up in there anyway. I'm sure that was. I guess I'd like to understand how it got there, which has an exclusion for a contractor bidding on any further phases, or I suppose they could bid, but would not be awarded any further phases of the contract. Is that a standard policy? Was that specifically considered for this particular procurement action, or?
There's a state law, Government Code Section 1090, which prohibits participating in the making of a contract in which you have a financial interest. And so, generally speaking, when a project involves multiple phases, we discourage, or our interpretation of state conflict of interest law has been that participating in one phase precludes you from participating in subsequent phases.
So is that the city attorney's interpretation of that law, and was it specifically a review in this particular procurement action?
That's how courts have interpreted government
I think
codes.
the issue, Commissioner Donaldson, is you don't want a conflict of interest. You don't want somebody who's in the beginning phases setting up the process who can design that process in a way that's going to benefit it when it responds. And so there's strict government laws to make sure that you're separating those problems to avoid the conflict of interest. And I understand the issue of the limited pool of applicants, but I think it's pretty important not only to obey the law, but to avoid conflicts of interest. We want to make sure that we get the best responder, the best people working on this project, and not people who had an inside edge because of the way that they wrote the program, the process.
Right. I mean,
Thanks,
I guess you could say that it's not that language itself is necessary to include, but the idea is that if you don't include it, and then you have a person who participates in this initial phase without knowing that they would be precluded from participating in a subsequent phase, then, that's to the detriment of the project.
Though I'm not familiar with city or state procurement laws, I am deeply familiar with federal procurement laws and procurement actions that are a development followed by a production process. in those processes, they do not do this for the specific reason that those who are most qualified to enter the first phase as a performer on such a contract are now not going to bid on it because they cannot participate in subsequent phases of the procurement. When you read the detail and everything they're supposed to be familiar with and everything, which I think the rest of the RFP is great. I like everything that's included. It's very comprehensive. When you look to hire a contractor that for $175,000 is going to cover that entire scope as requested, and then preclude anybody that has the qualifications to perform it, you are dooming this to failure. The city is dooming this to failure. I would like to know how many bidders we even have right now. Any? Do we think that, how many questions did we get? I guess we're not actually at the close date, or are we? It was July 21, and I saw that it was pulled, so maybe that's no longer applies, or June 21, I think.
On the bidder question, I'll let Director Arntz answer it, but I can just, I'm happy to have a more detailed discussion with you offline about state conflict of interest laws.
I get the conflict of interest. I completely get it. The amount of disclosure that's required in this contract, I don't know how that's going to give anybody any financial benefit. They have to, if they're going to have to document all this stuff, I would say that specifically will, that kind of level of disclosure would prevent them from having a huge advantage in downstream. I mean, we didn't even say, for example, the way they would best exercise such influence over downstream phases would be to create the actual RFPs, RFIs, RFQs that would go into those future phases. We haven't said that. What's actually says in here is provide information that could be used for that purpose. So I get the conflict of interest, but I also would say that I don't know what other, and maybe there are no other, contracts that the city has ever entered into that are such a development contract with this early phase followed by later phases. Maybe that's part of the problem. But what I'm very concerned that now we're losing time also with the action of the, strangely, with the procurement department now asking to pull back the contract. And then on top of that, something that is going to specifically preclude the most qualified bidders from performing on this contract. So, yes, I'd like to talk about it offline. Thank you.
I am very pleased that in drafting this RFP, you chose to comply with California law and with the conflict of interest rules underneath it.
I think it is a matter of interpretation.
Director Ernst, when will the number of applicants be public?
When the deadline passes.
When the deadline passes, okay. Okay, further discussion?
And Commissioner Donaldson, just the FYI, there was prior discussion on your last question, which was, why the pullback. That was explained.
Thank you. I do have one other question. The question period is closed, at least. How many questions did we get?
Regarding the RFP, we had one set of questions that came in.
So one questioner and one question?
I think there's 4 questions. One was a 3-parter.
From one requester?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And those are posted on the contracting website?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, seeing no further comments, let's move on to the next item.
Item 4, approval of minutes of previous meetings. Discussion and possible action to approve minutes for the May 17, 2017 Elections Commission meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
Okay, any public comment? Seeing none. Commissioner discussion? Seeing none. Secretary Chan?
Commissioner Donaldson,
Yes.
President Jordanik,
Yes.
Commissioner Jung,
Yes.
Commissioner Mogi,
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe,
Yes.
Vice President Paris,
Yes.
Commissioner Savant.
Yes.
It's unanimous. Motion passes.
Okay, thank you. Next item.
Item 5, Commissioners' reports. Commissioners' reports on topics not covered by another item on this agenda. meetings with public officials, oversight and observation activities, long-range planning for commission activities and areas of study, proposed legislation which affects elections.
Okay. Who would like to report? Anyone? I have a few things I could report. For starters, I just wanted to let the commission know a member of the public filed a public records request a few weeks ago. I think we all received that, but it's something that's taken me quite a bit of time to respond to, and it's something I'm going to continue spending some time on each week until that response is complete. And then, secondly, as Mr. Turner mentioned, there was an interesting hearing today. I didn't have a chance to listen to it myself, but this was the U.S. Senate, let's see what it's called here, U.S. Senate Select Committee on Intelligence that held a hearing on the Russian interference in the November election. And I think that's something that, we as a commission should be, try to stay informed about because, election security is something that affects our county too. And then lastly, just kind of more of an administrative item, if any commissioners are having any trouble resetting your password, you can either contact me or Secretary Chan offline and we can help you with those instructions because they're a little bit misstated. But, okay, anyone else?
I did one last push before the school year let out to try to get more students registered, so I do have a small haul for you there. I also have, with the exception of today and the Senate briefing, been doing my best to stay up on any of that hacking. So far, I'm not aware of any direct links from any evidence that has been publicly presented connected to this county in regards to the systems we use or who was targeted specifically. I, too, am actually very worried about that, but I haven't connected any dots. Not that I'm the gumshoe's going to find it, but I definitely would like any kind of report whatsoever from the director if you even get a whiff that we were affected whatsoever by any kind of hacking in this election.
Okay. Seeing no further comments, public comment on this item?
Very quickly, Brent Turner again with Cavo. Just to respond to that, there were some reports that recently have come out saying, I think it was 21 states were hacked. The DHS today didn't want to disclose the exact states, but from my understanding of people on the ground that are perusing California, it appears that possibly only Fresno had interference issues. I don't know if Fresno is aware of that yet, but they might be here momentarily. Also, we did note the issue that I mentioned earlier with Humboldt County having issues with the NSA leaked information affecting them directly, and Secretary of State Padilla showed up there. I think the issue, again, is not that it needs restating, but with the proprietary situation that we're in, there would be no way to tell, and it was unfortunately restated today, painfully, that there has been no forensic analysis of any of the systems nationally. So that was interesting because both Director Comey and others, Admiral Rogers and the DHS and the NASS, and of course the FBI isn't going to mention anything, but those others that I named all, when asked, is there any information regarding election system tabulation process being hacked? They've all been quick to answer no. But unfortunately, as we know, that's not really a full answer, because if you ask the next part of the question, has there been a forensic analysis? Has anybody looked to see if they've been hacked? The answer is no again. And just for the record, that was disclosed today. Also, Brian Fox and Cavo did put in requests nationally to do a forensic analysis, and we received answers back from the states saying that due to the proprietary nature of the software code, they could not allow a forensic analysis to occur. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Turner. Okay, seeing no further members of the public, next item.
Item 6, Director's Report. Director's Report on topics not covered by another item on this agenda.
All right. I don't have very much on my report. I did include a couple of attachments. The first attachment is a letter from Fred Neeson. He's the supervising attorney at Disability Rights California, even though I butchered that in my letter when I identified who cited his position. Fred wrote this actually in April, and he CC'd the commission, and I met with Fred after the commission meeting, and he asked if this came up at the commission meeting and if it was part of the agenda. I said no. So I told him I would attach his letter to my director's report in May, and I forgot. So then I saw him again last Friday when I presented at the mayor's the Disability Council, and I told Fred I would include the letter in my report so that it was in the public record regarding his concerns on voting systems and also using tablets as components of a voting system. Then also the second attachment, and usually I don't do attachments, so I'm bringing this up. Commissioner Mogi asked about the website at the May commission meeting. So we drafted this. It's not live yet. It'll go live in July. But this at least gives you a sense of the website and gives you a sense of the basis for the work on the website. And I can, if you want to take a look at this, we can come back at it again in August when the site's live, But this just to give you a sense of what's coming. And it'll be a wholesale change. And we'll have to do a bit of an outreach effort because people will go to the website on Monday and they'll see something different on Tuesday because it's a different interface, different links and all that. So it'll be pretty. I mean, people. I don't expect bad things to happen, but we'll make the word known that the website's changing. So, I don't know. Yeah. So I can take questions on my report, I guess.
In this letter from the Disability Rights California, is there anything addressed here in terms of accessibility that is not included in the RFP? In other words, was there anything here that we needed to have added to adequately address this request?
No. Well, the RFP doesn't cite the most drilled down elements of developing a voting system, but the RFP does cite the VVSG, I can't remember the standards for developing voting systems. It's cited in the RFP as something to
VSG 1.1 or 1.0?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay, good.
That's what Fred's referring to. And 1.1, he mentioned he cites the 1.1, which I don't know if that's actually been released yet. I don't know if that's the official next version or still in draft form. But so that's why I referenced 1 point in the RFP.
I don't have any questions, but I just wanted to thank you for your report. Also, the supplemental materials.
Yeah.
It's real helpful.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
I did have one specific question, Director Arntz. You said there were some minor cuts in the department's budget. Can you articulate what those were?
Yeah, so there's a in the contract we have with the election management system provider, DFM is the vendor name. There's a service for on-site assistance. It's not much. I can't remember what the amount is. We thought we would need that. We haven't used it in the last 2 years, so we agreed with the budget analyst office to cut that amount. And then I think there was some postage that was cut out. And the postage amount that we'd put in was based on expectation of doing more mailers in relation to providing information on language assistance to voters. But we were pretty aggressive the last 2 cycles in 2016 to inform voters of the language assistance opportunities that were available to them. So once that was brought to us in the conversation about the budget, we thought, yeah, we probably won't have as much. We didn't get a big bump in 2016. We did get some. We probably won't get an equal bump in 2017, 2018. So we agreed for that cut as well.
Okay, thank you.
It wasn't much. I don't know what it was.
Okay. Sounds like it wasn't the super mission critical foundational kinds of
No.
block and tackle things.
No.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
One other question related to hacking. Have we ever, or do we currently use any software, hardware, any other electronically accessible devices from VR systems?
No.
I didn't think so.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, public comment on this item? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the next item.
Item 7, California State Senate Bill Number 450, discussion and possible action regarding SB 450, elections, vote by mail voting, and mail ballot elections in San Francisco elections.
Okay, so this is an item that was requested, I think it was 2 or 3 months ago. Commissioner Paris, I think you were the one that had suggested it. And in the agenda packet, we did include the text of the bill. So if any commissioners would like to start the discussion off or ask Director Arntz any questions about this. I mean, I have just one question. I guess I could start it off. But Director Arntz, can you kind of talk about the process you foresee for, how San Francisco, the process it would use to decide whether to move towards this new vote center model? And do you think, is this something that we would wait for the Board of Supervisors to make a decision on, or would you approach the board at some point and ask them what they would prefer, or how do you see that happening?
Yeah, I don't have a grand plan in mind quite yet. I think the first thing that I want to see is what the other counties go through. I want to see what they put forward for their plans. I want to see what they put forward as their challenges. I want to see their after-election reports. I asked. There's a mentioning of a task force in the legislation. I asked to be placed on that, but there's already folks who beat me to it, so I won't be on the task force that's mentioned in the legislation. But the registrars group, the California Association of Elections and County, I can't remember the hell it is, CACEO. They have their own task force, so I'll join that, and they have a meeting coming up in July. I'll attend that. So I want to get a sense of what the other counties are going through, because I think in San Francisco, the bill's not a really good fit for many reasons. One, the bill really contemplates counties where there's more space for people to operate. There's more space between polling stations. There's cities in the counties in which voting centers could be staged. They have parking, that have lobbies. The other counties don't provide the return postage and the vote by mail ballots like San Francisco does. Thus, the requirement for the drop-off boxes to facilitate the return of ballots, because people don't put the wrong postage on there or don't want to put postage on it. So there's many instances where it's not really conducive to us going to this model. I'm not saying I'm not advocating against it. So I'd like to see what the other counties experience, what their thoughts are, and I think we ought to probably go forward and ask for amendments to this. That's in way for elements that are more supportive of San Francisco going to this model potentially. I do think the board has to be. It's a policy decision for the county. It is the board must weigh in on it, as will the mayor's office. Certainly, the elections commission will be part of that conversation too. Before there's more substance, there's more information, before there's context, I don't want to bring this forward to the board. To me, it's not quite a question to bring forward yet. And also, regarding the timing of implementing 450, so right now there's 13 counties, I think the number is, that can implement in 2018, and then the remainder can implement in 2020. Then LA is kind of a twist, that they call it a voting center or vote by mail model, I think, instead of a voting center model, but it's really the same thing. I don't think a presidential election is the time to put the most stress on your process and on your resources. I don't think that's the time for San Francisco to go forward in changing how its voters cast ballots. And I think 2022 probably is a better time frame. And so, and I say that too in conjunction with my sense of timing, to learn as much as we can from the other counties that will go forward in 2018, seek amendments to the statute prior to going forward in San Francisco, then of course having the city consider this. And this has to be very public just to go into the decision-making process. Has to be very public when the decision is made, in addition to the outreach to the voters about the change in the process that will occur. So I mean that's my rough thinking at this point on 450.
So you'd wait until after the November 2018 election, you think, where we'd have enough information to start thinking about it, or?
Yeah, I think even before, really. Yeah, because the plan, because as you saw in the legislation, there's a lot of noticing and participation with the public in setting these plans, and there's a draft plan, there's a draft plan, a amended plan, and then a third plan. I forgot how they titled it. So there's many forays in to go to the public, receive comment, and to make changes to the implementation plan for voting centers. And so at that time, and that's what I forget the time frame. It's several months prior to the election. So you have a long lead time prior to an election to get a sense of what other counties are going to be doing. So even before an election, you have a chance to start to get an assessment, to start having an assessment of what it would mean to go to this model in San Francisco.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm glad that you mentioned like the space issue, because in my notes when originally I brought this up, the very first question I asked is, where are we going to put this? We're going to have 50,000 people show up to one polling place, which, again, I thought was a great idea for other counties. You hit the nail on the head with my thinking. Do you have an inkling off the top of your head where we can fit these places? Especially because on, was this page 90? I don't know if it's 92 or 9. I see two different ones. It's also asking to put these centers in various locations, most of which we can identify, close to public transit, close to language minority populations. But there are some other places like voters with disabilities. I don't even know if we have the data to identify those people, or my personal favorite, accessible and free parking. I don't know where we're going to find that, but do we have any idea where we can actually house these voting centers?
I mean, there's ideas, but really, I mean, we'd have to approach the property holders, and ask, and if they're city properties, that there's a lot of conversations have to take place. No, I don't know. And then two, also, the bill requires that all as you mentioned earlier, the question about the Korean, Japanese, and Vietnamese language assistance. The bill requires, and it makes total sense, that all the voting centers provide the language assistance that is required for the area in which the voting center is located. Well, in San Francisco, essentially all the languages are located, would have to be located at a voting center. And so that increases our staffing, because you'd have to have at least 2 people per language staffing a voting center, because if someone wants to go on break, you would need someone who can provide service in a language if a voter were to walk up at that time. So, and since we have 3 additional languages besides English, that's 6 people per station. So we need to get space not just for the voters, but also for the people who would be staffing the voting center. So I mean, this is such a big issue. No, we haven't even started making preliminary plans about where to stage a voting center or where it can happen. But all those elements, the transportation, the language assistance, people with disabilities, those are all elements that parking, we have to consider that, even though we know parking is a premium in San Francisco. We still have to consider that element and address it with each place that we identify as a potential site for the voting center.
Mm-hmm. And maybe it's because I've gone over this twice and I still can't find it, or I'm blind and need new glasses. I don't really see anything related to the staffing requirements. Currently we need a minimum of 3 people in case one needs to use the bathroom or whatever at all times in a 1,000 person precinct, but I can't imagine increasing that number by 50. Could you please either point to me or at least describe, since I can't find it, any of the staffing requirements for these new voting centers?
Yeah, I don't know I haven't read this enough to know the code, the sections that state the staffing, but there is language in here that indicates each voting center must provide assistance in the languages that would be expected in the area in which that voting center.
But what about, like, regardless of language, just like the warm bodies to actually just run it?
No, there's no set number.
There's no set number?
No.
Well, that could be a blessing or a curse. Haven't decided yet. One other question. So in this section, there's also either page 6 or page 92. Again, I don't know which one to refer to. In section E, it's talking about having an electronic mechanism for the county officials to immediately access and at minimum the following voter registration, such as name, birth date, language preference, party preference. Essentially like an online poll book. Do we have sufficient technology to, one, do that, with the current technology we have in EIMS or IMS, and two, do we have the security necessary? I mean, security in our elections is now a premium, and where does our security stand in regarding, actually putting this online?
Yeah, no, the department right now does not have an outside connection to the voter registration database, so it's not something we could scale to include into the voting centers. The one question that I have, though, and I haven't seen it answered, is this a live connection to the database, or is it a connection to that day's information? For instance, maybe every day you have a new file that you distribute to the voting centers, because everyone that goes to the voting center, right now we don't know how they even vote. So if they use the voting center model we have here in City Hall, the ballots go into envelopes, you could review them, and then if there was an issue with someone casting a vote into voting centers, you would capture it that way. But we're talking about a lot of voting system issues at this point. By the time we get to voting centers, we'll probably have a different system than we have now, so I can't forecast what that environment is going to be. But a great concern that I have, like I was saying about the additional language assistance, having 2 people per language at the voting center is 6 people, then potentially a supervisor or manager at 7 people at each voting center. And if it is a live connection, we don't have a department large enough to staff 50 voting centers because that would be 300 to 350 more people that we don't. We're 30 people essentially in the Department of Elections. That's it. So it's 10 times more the number of staff than the permanent staff we have in the department. So you'd have all these people who are out beyond the boundary of City Hall, out beyond the boundaries of the office, potentially having access to the database. That, to me, is the most immediate concern that I have. Just people who have been trained, but just like as poll workers, you don't know what training sticks until the action occurs. So we have newish people accessing the database potentially, having access to the information. I'm sure we could put privileges so that certain actions cannot happen with the data. So there's a lot of questions around that issue that I can't answer, and I have a lot of concern about access to the information. I can't give you an answer at this point.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of which, that actually brings me to my next question about poll workers, and maybe this is more of a legal question. So on the day of the vote, on election day, we obviously give them a stipend, which, if ever they did the math, is like less than minimum wage, hence the stipend. Does that change any kind of legal relationship that we have with these poll workers if they need to be staffing some of these centers several days ahead of time? Like, do they need to now become temporary staff and seasonal employees?
I don't know. That I can't answer right now. But if folks do staff for the full 10 days, for instance, then they would probably make more than $2,000 on the stipend, which would require them to file a 1099 on their earnings from the county. And that's a huge issue in itself. We've experienced that in 2008. We had 5 elections in one calendar year for tax reporting issues. It's just the barrage of calls we have from the poll workers. So yeah, there are a lot of questions around that, even around stipends. Are they poll workers? Are they employees? I can't answer those questions right now.
Anyone else?
Yeah, just one more comment. I think, the idea to wait until there's more information makes sense, and to kind of request amendments that might be helpful. I think that also makes sense. I think the one thing, though, that could affect San Francisco is that, if we're making decisions about what interim voting system to acquire, and also decisions about how to design an open source voting system, it could help to know earlier which direction we want to go, because that could affect the type of equipment we'd want. But if we don't make the decision earlier, then we'd kind of have to design for both possibilities, which could, maybe add to the cost or something. But okay, let's see. Yeah.
Just my final comments. First of all, thank you for bringing this up. I can see that, my purpose in bringing this up, since I knew it was a substantive change, was legitimate, but I also kind of realized having this discussion this early is also not as formative as I would have liked. So I would like to discuss this again in, say 2 more years when we have a better idea of what we're doing. But at the same time, some things being brought up, there are so many more issues underlying that within time, if you do see them to be seriously problematic, for example, the online voter registration database, a year ago I would not have seen to be problematic, but after this interference in the presidential election, I do. I would like us to maybe consider asking for some sort of revisions from the state, because I do have some serious concerns. But thank you for taking the time to address the specific law.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I don't think we did public comment yet, did we, on this item? Okay, public comment? Okay, seeing none. So any further comments before we move on? Okay, next item.
Item 8, Civil Grand Jury Report, discussion and possible action regarding the Election Commission's response to the Civil Grand Jury Report of 2016-2017.
Okay, in this item, I just want to give a brief introduction and then turn it over to Deputy City Attorney White. So last week, the Civil Grand Jury sent us their 2016-2017 report, and there are one finding and 2 recommendations it asks us to respond to. And the mayor's office also independently reached out to the commission because they want to kind of coordinate the logistics of responses from the different groups. And this is something that the commission did, I think, last year. We responded to a couple of things on a different report. But the other thing is that the Civil Grand Jury is asking for a response within 90 days, but the mayor's office is asking if we can do it in 60 days. So I thought we could try to settle our response today. And then just so people know, the things that we're being asked to respond to are on the bottom of page 30 of the report.
And 27.
I'm sorry?
And 27.
Oh, there's... I think it's just the same wording, just differently.
Okay. Yeah.
So, so we can look on either page 30 or page 27. And then the other document is, there's a 1-page key, which is sort of the options that the commission has to respond to the finding and then the recommendations. So today we kind of have to decide how to respond to the finding and then how to respond to the recommendations. And Deputy City Attorney White, I was thinking you could kind of, review what you've kind of came to understand after looking at the recommendations that we're asked to respond to.
Sure. So, as a general matter, this Civil Grand Jury report focuses on, the city's retirement system and the fact that, as things currently stand, there are substantial issues about how the city's retirement system is currently funded. And so one of the concerns that the Civil Grand Jury had is that when various measures were placed before the voters weren't provided with, sufficient information about, the fiscal impacts that particular measures would have. And so So the recommendations have to do with basically what would go into the voter information pamphlet and basically making efforts to ensure that voters are sufficiently informed about the fiscal impacts that particular measures would have. If you're wondering what any of that has to do with the Department of Elections and the Elections Commission, the answer is very little. The Municipal Elections Code is what dictates what goes into the voter information pamphlet. That's not a determination that's made by the department or the commission. Similarly, determinations about the fiscal impact of particular measures are made exclusively by, the controller's office, and each, ballot measure each ballot measure period has a controller's report that discusses what the fiscal impacts are. So, even though the civil grand jury asked the commission and the department to ensure that future voter information pamphlets for retirement system related propositions provide voters with complete financial details, I think that recommendation really asks the department and the commission to do something that it lacks the authority to do. I understand, I can guess why they included the department and the commission. They probably saw that the voter information pamphlet, they think it perhaps can be improved, and since the department prints the voter information pamphlet and the commission oversees the department, maybe they wanted the department and the commission to weigh in. So my recommendation would be to basically, provide a response to the civil grand jury that indicates that the department and the commission, lack the authority to do any of the things that are being recommended. So I don't think there's really anything the department or the commission could do beyond that.
I make that motion.
Well, I second.
So, I think we should be a little bit more specific in our motion. If we look at the key, does everyone see this key? And it says with the findings, we need to respond as to whether we agree or whether we disagree. So I think for the finding, we should make a motion as to whether we agree or not. And then, but for the recommendations, I just want to be clear. In the motion, I still think we should conform to the template that they're asking us to comply with. There are these 4 options for responding.
Well, let me ask a question of Deputy City Attorney White. On the findings, we're asked to either agree or disagree, and I don't think we have the information with which to agree or disagree. We haven't specifically analyzed the voter information pamphlets and what information may or may not have been available regarding costs and what might have been missing. We don't. I can't take a position on whether that finding is accurate or not. That's an incredibly detailed finding that would take an awful lot of study that's kind of beyond our competence and our authority. So if we determine that we just don't have the information to agree or disagree, are we supposed to just say we disagree because we don't have enough information to agree?
Oh, point of clarification. Are we being asked to agree or disagree with the findings or with the recommendations? I was under the impression that it was the recommendations.
Well, I think.
Can we clarify?
I think it's 2 different issues.
Yeah,
We're supposed
he
to
actually says
respond to
it
the findings in one way, and we're supposed to respond to the recommendations in another way. So my question was directed to the finding itself. I think we know what the answer is. We'll discuss that in a moment, to the recommendations. But what are we supposed to do with a finding that we can't possibly agree or disagree with?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would recommend is that you could say that you agree with the idea that voters, should be fully informed of the fiscal impact of retirement-related measures, but that the commission lacks the authority to do anything about those things.
And how would that fit into the Who provided this key? Is this the grand jury's key? We're supposed to
Yeah.
give one or two, so how do we just say we're not going to give one or two, we're going to give a hybrid?
Well, I think you could agree with the finding that voters should be fully informed, and then it says no explanation needed, but it doesn't say that you're precluded from giving an explanation. So I would say that, I don't feel strongly one way or the other, because I think whenever the civil grand jury reads the fact that we don't have the authority to
Right.
do anything, they're not going to care very much. But
So I think my recommendation, in light of what you've just said, my suggestion to the commission would be that with respect to the finding, we say that we disagree with the finding as stated in finding 3, and in an explanation, we state that we agree that voters should be provided full and accurate information, but we do not have the information with which to assess the specific findings in finding 3, and therefore we disagree on that basis. That'd be my recommendation with respect to the finding part.
I agree with your disagreement. And but Commissioner Rowe, what about this as something a little simpler? I think what you're saying is that we lack the factual basis to make an assessment of the finding either way. I mean, in other realms, it's adequate to say we disagree because we lack the basis to agree to assess the finding, and then go on to say that the recommendation will not be implemented because we lack the authority to do what's requested. And if we want to be more specific, we could do what Deputy City Attorney Josh suggested and explain that it's the municipal elections code that determines what goes in a pamphlet. And
So rather than responding to the finding with 1 or 2, we just say we're not able to do that because we lack the information to do it.
well, no, I am saying I'm suggesting that we respond to finding F3 by saying we disagree because we lack the information to assess their premise, or words to that effect.
Can't we
In
just
other
say
words,
we do?
go ahead.
This is not a form we have to fill out online. It seems like we're going to end up writing some sort of a letter. Can't we just respond by saying we decline to respond to the finding, as agree or disagree, due to the facts that we do not have the information?
If
make
I
the
can-
oversight.
If I can address that comment, because I was the one who physically responded to the grand jury finding that we did last year. So we don't write a letter. There's actually a form that the mayor's office is compiling
I see.
by all these people, and it's a template, like an Excel spreadsheet, and you input agree, disagree, explanation. It looks very, very much like it looks on this
Okay.
page right here. So we are kind of limited in the way that we respond, and I don't know that anybody really cares how we respond. There's probably a whole bunch of these people on the sheet.
Yeah.
I think if I remember correctly, last year we came up with an agreement or a disagreement, and then the supervisors, who were also supposed to agree or disagree, declined to give a response. So if the supervisors did it, I would suppose that if we did it, no one's really going to complain. But last year, we tried to technically require with what the mayor's office had requested. I don't feel strongly one way or the other, but I do think that we should not agree with the finding. So we
Yes.
either disagree or we decline to agree or disagree.
Agree again with that disagreement. And the way I would phrase it is, again, and let me put this in the form of a motion. So I move that the commission respond to finding F3 as follows, that the respondent disagrees wholly with the finding because the commission lacks the knowledge to assess whether the voter information pamphlets for retroactive retirement benefits increase propositions between 1996 and 2008 did or did not provide voters with complete estimates of the proposition's costs, et cetera. And that with respect to the recommendations, that we respond that the recommendation will not be implemented because we lack the authority to do what's requested.
Second.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on the finding issue, like I mean, I wouldn't say, I mean, we're the Elections Commission. All we have to do is, we could look up the voter information pamphlets and just look at the measures and see if the information's there. I mean, I think that's something that, someone can figure out in like an hour or two.
I disagree with that. We can see what's there, but we don't know what might or might not be missing. We would have to request information from other sources, I'm not sure who that would be, about if there was information to be provided, what was that information? So you can see what's in it, but it's impossible to know what's absent from it without a pretty deep dive into
agree.
a lot of other sources that we don't have access to sitting here today, and certainly
Completely
not in a
agree.
public meeting.
Well, it enumerates it here. It says, did it provide voters with estimates of the costs, who would pay those costs, and how they were financed? I mean, I think it's easy to see for each of those things, did the ballot summary include that information?
But I mean, no, and that's not entirely accurate because it said it did not provide voters with complete estimates of all of those things. I mean, how can we possibly assess whether those estimates were complete or not?
Well, I mean, for example, if it didn't provide any estimate, then the answer is clear. I mean, the answer is no.
Well, have you checked into we're sitting here today looking at this, and weren't provided the voter information pamphlets from 1996 to 2008. Have you looked at those to determine whether they included those estimates, and if so, whether they were complete?
No, I haven't personally done that. But I think for today's purposes, I think that one option would be to delegate someone to look this up, and then if the answer is clear, to say that we agree, and if it's not clear, then we could fall back to the response of saying that.
I don't see what difference that makes because at the end of the day, we're not going to comply.
Right.
Well, this is a responsibility of the commission that's spelled out in the city's charter. I mean, I think we should try
I know,
to...
but the commission doesn't have the responsibility to react in a simplistic yes or no fashion to an imperfect question. Where we lack the information to assess the factual premise. That's not our responsibility. It's the responsibility of the questioner.
Well, it is our responsibility because we're listed as one of the responders. So.
But we're listed as one of the responders because they had the incorrect assumption that we have the authority to ensure that certain information goes in the voter information pamphlet. We don't have that authority, and therefore the whole question is really irrelevant to us. They've done their own detailed analysis. They're not going to change their analysis on that issue. What they want to know is how we feel about ensuring that certain information go into the voter information pamphlet, and neither we nor the department have that capacity. So this is really a futile exercise, and they're not going to care what we say about the finding once we tell them that we can't comply with the recommendation.
Yeah, I think we're really quibbling about nothing at the end of the
Okay,
day.
well, if we're up to me, I think that we should at least make a good faith effort to look at the voter information pamphlets. If it's as hard as you think it is to find this information, then I think we'd find out pretty quickly. But I don't think we should just say we're not able to do this without even trying.
Well, I'd like a vote on my motion. I think this is a waste of time.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but for the recommendations, responding to the recommendations, if we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4 and our 4 options, it's not asking if we agree or disagree with the recommendation. Isn't it just saying the recommendation will or will not be implemented? Under number 1, it's saying it has been implemented, but we're talking about number 4. The recommendation will not be implemented because it is not warranted or reasonable, and our explanation is that we don't have the authority. So we're talking about agreeing, and that is true to the findings if we agree or disagree. But number 4, I think it's cut and dry that we're not talking about agreement. I think we're just talking about will we implement it or not.
And I believe the motion with respect to the recommendations was consistent with item 4, that the recommendation will not be implemented because it is not warranted or is not reasonable, and the explanation is because we lack the authority to do it, if that's how I understood the motion.
Okay, well,
Yeah, agreement or disagreement, that has to do with the prior box. Is that what
Yes,
you understand?
but we
that
are
part of it?
talking, it does have to do with the prior box, but I'm hearing agreement or disagreement quite a bit in response to the recommendations. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear.
Okay.
So I also want to make one comment about the recommendation portion of your motion. You had said that you're recommending that we say that the recommendation will not be implemented for both recommendations? Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, so for the second recommendation, it says that by the end of 2018, the controller's office shall provide, blah, blah, blah. I mean, I think for this one, we don't know if the controller is going to implement that or not. So I think it would be wrong for us to say it won't be implemented. I mean, I think for that one, we'd want to say it requires further analysis.
Actually, that's another question maybe for Josh. Under the responders, because it does have 3 responders, the Election Commission, the Department of Elections, and the Controller, because there are 3, and it's very clear that, as he says, recommendation 2 is much more directed to the Controller's office. Are we legally required to answer like all 3, or can we just answer recommendation 1 since it actually names us specifically?
I received a copy of the spreadsheet, and we're asked to respond to each one.
Draft. Okay.
I mean, I would think that we're called upon logically to respond to those questions that are actually directed to us, and so.
But we weren't, though. I mean, that's.
I think that,
I know, but here's my problem with that. If we respond further analysis, I'm not going to do any further analysis on it. No, neither is this commission, because it's irrelevant. It's irrelevant, and it's not within our authority. So why would we? We shouldn't do any further analysis. It's not within the scope of our knowledge. And just because someone asks us a question doesn't mean that we have to go on a futile exercise. I think that's ridiculous.
I interpret them to be asking whether we will implement those recommendations. And the answer is we will not implement those
Exactly.
recommendations, whether it's recommendation 1 or recommendation 2, because we lack the authority to do so. I think that's all we're saying. We're whatever the controller responds, the controller responds, but we're not recommending, we're not implementing either one. Is that how you interpret it, Josh?
Yeah, that's how I understand it
Yes.
as well. We have no authority, right? That's the point.
Yeah, I mean, I just think we were erroneously included.
I have one more question. Director Arntz, did you or are you planning to review the voter information pamphlets for those years to answer the finding portion, or no?
No.
No? Okay. All right, so let's do public comment on this item. Seeing none. And is there any further discussion? Okay, Secretary Chan.
President Janik, I will not be able to repeat his motion word for word. But this is on Commissioner Jung's motion, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so yes or no? Commissioner Donaldson?
Oh, do we have a second on that motion?
I second it.
Yes.
Yes. President Janik?
No.
Commissioner Jung?
Yes.
Commissioner Mogi?
Yes.
Commissioner Rowe?
Yes.
Vice President Paris?
Yes.
Commissioner Safan?
Yes.
You have a 6-1 vote. Motion carries.
Okay, let's go on to the next item. Well, actually, just logistically, what I will do is, Deputy Secretary White, you can craft the response, according to what was voted on, and then I can just fill out the spreadsheet. So, okay, next item.
Item 9, agenda items for future meetings. Discussion and possible action regarding items for future agendas.
Okay, on this item, a few things I want to mention. For starters, in the past, we've usually taken 1 month off each summer, and it's usually been July. I think last year it was August, so I'm just going to have next month off. So, and then as far as agenda items for future meetings, I do want to set the process for the annual evaluation of the director at the next meeting, so we can have that there. And then next, Mr. Neeson, who Director Arntz mentioned in the earlier agenda item, emailed me yesterday and wants the commission to revisit a policy that the commission passed back in 2008 that affects how accessible voting devices are presented to voters in polling places. And I told him I would be willing to put that on the agenda for the August meeting. And so he'd like to revisit this policy. This is something that Director Arntz also spoke with him about and let me know about. And just one more thing on this item. When I was at the GET Summit last month, I attended a presentation that Mr. Neeson gave about this topic, and I thought it was very convincing. So there's that. Any other discussion, comments? Okay.
Actually, one other thing. Is there anything that you require this commission to do in the month of July regarding the open source voting system? Will anything be delayed by us not meeting?
No.
Okay. See any public comment on this item? Seeing none? Okay. All right, that concludes the meeting. The time is now 7:21 p.m. Have a wonderful evening, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.